2 years ago, I found myself deeply in love with a woman named Jenny. I had invested so much of my time, loyalty, and emotions into our relationship, believing wholeheartedly that we were building a future together. I imagined a life filled with love, a cozy home, and perhaps even children. I thought I had crafted a beautiful narrative for us, one that would lead to a joyful proposal and a life of shared dreams. However, in a single night, everything I believed about our relationship came crashing down. At that point in my life, I held a naive belief that treating someone with care and respect would naturally evoke the same feelings in return. I believed that love was a two-way street, where mutual affection and appreciation flourished. But life has a way of teaching us harsh lessons. And that night, Jenny made a choice that illuminated my actual place in her life, a place I had never thought I occupied. The night was supposed to be monumental. It was Jenny's birthday, our relationship anniversary, and the very evening I had planned to propose to her. I had meticulously arranged everything. Reservations at a charming restaurant, a private table just for us, and a perfect engagement ring hidden away in my pocket. I envisioned her joy, the tears of happiness in her eyes, and the overwhelming love that would envelop us as I slid the ring onto her finger. I was both nervous and excited, ready to create a memory that would last a lifetime. But in a twist of fate, Jenny decided to abandon our anniversary dinner at the last minute to attend a wild party with her high-status friends. It was a decision that left me reeling. There was no discussion, no hint of remorse, just a nonchalant statement from her. "Oh, I'll make it up to you. We can do dinner another day." When I called her, hoping to convince her to reconsider, she brushed off my feelings, dismissing my concerns with a casual, "It's just dinner." In that moment, my heart shattered into pieces. I realized that the love and effort I had poured into our relationship meant nothing to her. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and grappling with the harsh reality that someone I had loved so fiercely could make me feel so insignificant. I had sacrificed so much for us, and yet she had chosen to party over the life we were supposed to build together. The next morning, I woke with a heavy heart, still clinging to a flicker of hope that maybe Jenny would realize a mistake and reach out to me. But as the hours passed without a word from her, it became clear. If she truly cared, she would have reached out. In that moment of clarity, I made a life-altering decision. I was done. I went to my phone, deleted her number, and blocked her on every social media platform, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, erasing every picture and message that reminded me of her. If she didn't prioritize me, I wouldn't leave the door open for her to return whenever it suited her. With Jenny out of the picture, I faced another realization. I had no ties keeping me in that city anymore. I had previously passed up job opportunities for her sake, but now staying felt pointless. I was determined to take control of my life and embrace the unknown. I told myself that opportunities would come my way once I made the move. That evening, I sat down with my parents and shared everything that had transpired. I told them about my plans to propose, how Jenny had ruined that moment, and how I needed to leave for a fresh start. My mom's heart broke for me, while my dad remained silent, but I sensed his disappointment in how Jenny had treated me. They supported my decision to leave, understanding that I needed to break free from the chains of a relationship that had become toxic. When they asked where I was going, I kept my plans vague. I didn't want Jenny showing up with a half-hearted apology, attempting to reel me back in. I needed a clean break. The next morning, I packed my bags and walked out of that house with no intention of looking back. I reached out to an old schoolmate, Daniel, who had moved to a bigger city a few years ago. Despite not having spoken in a while, he readily offered me a place to crash, provided me with a landing spot in this new chapter of my life. When I arrived at Daniel's place, I barely spoke about what happened. He could sense I was going through something, but he didn't press me for details, which I appreciated. I didn't want to rehash the painful past. Instead, I buried myself in work, taking on every job I could find, day shifts, night shifts, anything to keep me occupied and distracted. My body was exhausted, but my mind was numb to the pain of what I had lost. I avoided social media completely, refusing to wonder what Jenny was doing or even think her name. My sole focus became making money and securing my future, determined to never be left behind again. I took my financial responsibility to new heights, splitting my earnings into two categories: investing in myself and the stock market. I immersed myself in learning about finances, and gradually, I began to see results. After a few months, I managed to move into my own small apartment. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. No more crashing on couches or rely on others. 2 years passed in a blur, and the pain that once consumed me no longer dictated my life. Looking back, I realized that Jenny had done me a favor. If she hadn't walked away that night, I might never have walked toward the life I was meant to have. One day, while at the mall, I unexpectedly ran into Eve, one of Jenny's old friends. Initially, I felt a wave of hesitation. The last time I had heard her name, Jenny had accused her of trying to steal me away. Back then, I had believed Jenny's narrative, thinking Eve was a threat to our relationship. But standing there, I realized Eve didn't resemble the villain Jenny had painted her to be. Eve greeted me warmly, surprised to see me. After a moment of awkward silence, she asked if I had time for a coffee. I figured it wouldn't hurt to catch up, so we sat down at a small cafe. During our conversation, Eve shared her perspective, revealing that she felt Jenny didn't appreciate me, which had caused a rift in their friendship. This revelation floored me. I had never questioned Jenny's portrayal of Eve, but listening to Eve, everything began to click into place. Eve explained how she had confronted Jenny about her behavior, but instead of reflecting on her actions, Jenny had flipped the narrative and accused Eve of trying to take me from her. This accusation had spread to their friend group, effectively isolating Eve from the dynamic. The more Eve spoke, the clearer it became that Jenny had manipulated the situation to paint herself as a victim. I recounted my experience to Eve, sharing how I had planned to propose, how Jenny had thrown it all away, and how I ultimately left everything behind to start anew. It felt liberating to voice my feelings to someone who understood the toxic dynamics at play. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel foolish for believing in Jenny. I felt relieved to know the truth. As time passed, Eve and I stayed in touch, and our connection grew naturally. We began hanging out more, grabbing lunch, watching movies, and simply enjoying each other's company. Initially, I remained guarded, hesitant to trust again. However, Eve never pushed for more than I was willing to give, allowing me the space to breathe and heal. One Sunday afternoon, while tidying my apartment, I caught the enticing aroma of fresh coffee wafting through the air. Eve had texted me, saying she was bringing over something she had cooked. I smiled at the thought. When the doorbell rang, I eagerly opened it, expecting to see her cheerful face. Instead, I was met with a sight I never anticipated. It was Jenny. For a moment, my brain struggled to comprehend her presence. She looked the same, hesitant and unsure. My first instinct wasn't to greet her or express anger. I simply asked how she had found me. She opened her mouth to explain, but I didn't want to hear it. I shook my head and told her to leave. In that moment, Jenny broke down in front of me, sobbing uncontrollably. She begged for forgiveness, claiming she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She admitted that she had treated me poorly, taken me for granted, and should have never let me go. She lamented that since I disappeared, nothing in her life had gone right. As she looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, searching for sympathy, I felt nothing. I stood there, indifferent to her anguish. I had imagined this moment countless times. Well, I would say if she ever came back. But now that it was happening, I realized I had moved on. Just then, I heard footsteps approaching. Eve appeared, carrying a container of homemade food, her smile radiant and effortless. The contrast between her and Jenny was stark. I stepped forward, pulled Eve into a hug, and kissed her on the cheek, welcoming her. Jenny's face twisted in confusion and humiliation. Without hesitation, I took Eve's hand, stepped inside, and shut the door behind us, locking it. I didn't look back to see if Jenny was still there. I didn't need to. She had made her choice 2 years ago, and now it was my turn to choose. Looking back, I realized that pain could be an incredible teacher. When Jenny chose that party over me, it felt like my world had collapsed. I questioned my worth, wondering if I had been too demanding or if I simply wasn't enough. But the truth was stark. I had never been a problem. Jenny simply didn't value me the way I had valued her. Laying in bed that night, grappling with my heartache. I had no idea that my best decision was just around the corner. Walking away from her was one of the hardest things I ever did, but it ultimately saved me. Life is a funny way of balancing itself out. After moving on, I dedicated myself to hard work and wise investments, building a life I could be proud of. Meanwhile, I learned that Jenny had jumped into another relationship almost immediately. A guy who fit her party lifestyle perfectly. Initially, it seemed like everything was perfect for her, filled with excitement and thrill. But as time went on, reality hit hard. That guy turned out to be abusive, and their relationship devolved into chaos, filled with fights and drama, until it ultimately fell apart. When there was nothing left, that's when Jenny showed up at my door, crying and begging for forgiveness. By then, it was too late. I had moved on, grown stronger, and learned a crucial lesson. Real love doesn't need to be forced. If someone truly wants to be in your life, they will act like it. They won't treat you as an afterthought or make you compete for their attention. Now, I want to hear from you all. Was I too harsh in my response to Jenny, or did she deserve it? If someone betrayed your trust and then came back, what would you do? Have you ever felt taken for granted, only for someone to realize your worth when it was too late? Let's discuss it in the comments, because I know many of you have faced similar experiences.